Chapter 1. The Wind Beyond the Ridge, Part 1. The morning broke without a sound. Above the mountains, the sky unfolded like a pale cloth, thin and trembling, as the first breath of dawn slipped across the ridges. The wind stirred, slow at first, then steady, the kind of wind that carried the scent of melting frost and faraway rain. On the highest ridge, a lone figure moved, broad-shouldered, deliberate, and quiet. It was Arlo. The old Anatolian shepherd walked with a slow, unhurried strength, his paws pressing into the thin crust of snow that lingered from the night. The wind tugged gently at his coat, thick, pale gold and gray, rippling like tall grass under sunlight. He did not look back. Behind him lay the valleys of his youth, lands where he once stood guard over flocks that no longer roamed, fields that now lay silent beneath frost and time. Ahead, the world stretched wide and nameless. The ridge curved like the spine of an ancient beast. Rocks jutted from the soil, each dark with lichen and the memory of rain. Between them, low tufts of grass trembled, their edges silvered with dew. Arlo's steps made no echo. The earth seemed to breathe with him, as if listening. He paused once to lift his head. The wind came again, carrying the faint scent of pine, river stone, and something older, the smell of distance. His ears twitched, and for a moment, he simply stood there, feeling the vastness unfold around him. Far below, clouds drifted like sleeping creatures in the valley. Above, the sky widened, pale gold fading to the faintest blue. The world was awake, but only barely. Arlo walked on. Each step was a quiet testament to time, to endurance, to the patient rhythm of being alive. His movements were measured, neither hurried nor weary. He carried himself with the dignity of something that had long since accepted the nature of its path. The ridge fell away into a series of slopes, half rock, half frozen soil. Between the stones, small streams whispered beneath the crust of ice. Arlo bent his head to drink from one, the water shockingly cold, biting and clear. When he raised his muzzle, droplets caught in his fur like tiny shards of light. The sun climbed higher, scattering its warmth in uneven patches. It touched the tips of the firs far below, caught on a ledge of rock, then vanished again into cloud. Arlo's breath steamed faintly in the air. His paws left faint impressions that the wind quickly erased. It was as though he passed through the world without leaving a mark, and yet the land seemed to know him, to open a quiet passage for his steps. The wind shifted again, brushing through the dry grass. It moved like a voice, not speaking but remembering. It remembered every creature that had ever crossed these ridges, the wolves, the deer, the shepherds, the countless generations of dogs before him. Arlo was part of that memory. He did not think in words, but in sensations, the coolness of morning stone, the weight of air before snow, the way the wind folded and unfolded around him like invisible wings. For a time, he stood on the crest of the ridge and gazed outward. The horizon trembled with distance. There, beyond the farthest mountains, the sun broke fully through, gold spilling across the world, cutting through clouds like a slow fire. And in that light, everything seemed ancient, the rocks, the sky, the silence. Even Arlo's heartbeat felt old, echoing with a rhythm older than memory. He began to descend. The slope was steep, littered with stones that shifted underfoot. But he did not stumble. His body, though heavy and aged, still moved with the surety of long habit, the instinct born of endless seasons spent walking, watching, guarding. The scent of earth grew stronger as he descended, damp, mineral, rich. Somewhere ahead, he knew, the land would open into meadows again. He did not know what he sought. Perhaps nothing at all. Perhaps only the continuation of movement itself, the unbroken thread of journey. As he moved, the air thickened with mist. It rose from the valleys like breath, curling around his legs and shoulders, softening his outline. The world turned quiet again, the kind of quiet that hums beneath the skin, not the absence of sound, but the fullness of stillness. Arlo's eyes, amber and deep, caught the faintest glimmer of light through the fog. It wasn't a thing to chase. It was simply there, a presence in the distance. He moved toward it. Around him, the landscape changed, the ground softened, giving way to moss and frost-wet grass. The scent of pine grew stronger, mingled with that of stone and iron and wild thyme. Every so often, a bird called from somewhere unseen, a single note, swallowed by the mist. It reminded him of nights long ago, when the shepherd's fires burned in the distance, and the stars hung low enough to seem almost reachable. He did not remember faces or words, only warmth, the rhythm of breathing beside him, the quiet trust of belonging. Now there was only the mountain and the wind. Hours passed, though time had lost its meaning here. The sun drifted behind clouds again, and the color of the world dimmed to gray. Arlo's pace slowed. His paws sank deeper into the earth, which was beginning to soften with thaw. He stopped by a flat stone, half buried in moss, and lay down beside it. The ground was cold, but not unkind. He rested his head between his paws and watched the mist curl and shift before him. There was a pulse beneath the soil, faint, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. He could feel it through his chest, through the pads of his paws. For a long time, he simply breathed. The world breathed with him. And then, in that stillness, memory stirred, not a thought, but a feeling, a scent carried by the wind, the dry sweetness of summer grass, the hum of bees, the laughter of water running through stones. He opened his eyes. The ridge above him was fading into cloud. The day had turned fully gray now, the light soft and uncommitted. But somewhere, faintly, he could still see the sky, a thin ribbon of brightness, stretched above the peaks. It was enough. Arlo rose again. His muscles ached, but the movement was smooth, instinctive. He turned his gaze toward the east, where the ridge fell into a distant valley, unseen through mist. The path called him, not with promise, not with urgency, but with quiet persistence. And so he walked again. The wind followed. The valley opened before him like a slow exhale. The mist that had followed him down the mountain thinned and drifted apart, revealing the shape of the world below, long stretches of meadow and rock, cut in two by a river that glimmered faintly under the pale sun. The air here was heavy with water and silence. Every sound, the flutter of a bird, the distant creak of ice breaking from stone, seemed softened by distance, as though the valley was half asleep, dreaming of its own reflection. Arlo paused at the edge of the slope. The wind had quieted now, replaced by the low, rhythmic hum of the river. He could smell it, cold, metallic, full of life and old stones. It smelled of everything that moved and everything that stayed. He descended slowly, each step sinking into damp soil. The ground was softer here, yielding beneath his paws, covered in old grass and the pale bones of last year's reeds. Above him, the mountains still brooded, their peaks lost to cloud, their shadows long and deep. As he neared the bottom of the slope, the scent of the river grew stronger. The air turned cooler, filled with faint droplets that clung to his fur. The sound of water surrounded him, not rushing, not wild, but endless, the patient rhythm of something that had been flowing since before names existed. He reached the bank at last. Before him, the river stretched wide, not fierce, but vast, moving with the slow certainty of time itself. Its surface reflected the muted sky, a shifting silver gray broken by the passing of leaves and fragments of ice. Arlo stood at the edge for a long time. He watched the way the current folded and unfolded, the way light moved across it like thought. The smell of it filled his senses, deep, mineral, eternal. He bent his head and drank. The water was shockingly cold, yet clean, alive. It burned against his throat and chest, but there was peace in it, the kind of peace that came from something older than rest. When he lifted his head again, droplets fell from his muzzle, breaking the surface in small, widening circles. Each ripple carried outward, bending light, distorting reflection, as though the world itself was momentarily remade by his breath. Across the river, fog drifted low, rising in thin columns that swayed like ghosts of trees. There was no movement, no sound but water. Yet Arlo felt watched, not by eyes, but by presence. The valley had a way of seeing without sight, of remembering without word. He walked along the bank, following the slow curve of the river's path. The mud was soft beneath his paws, the grass wet and yielding. Every few steps, he left a print that filled instantly with clear water, then faded as the current licked at the shore. The river guided him. He did not question why he followed it. perhaps because it moved the way he did, forward, quietly, with no promise of arrival. The valley deepened as he went. Steep banks rose on either side, draped in willows whose branches swept the surface. Here the air was thick with scent, moss, silt, decaying leaves, the sweetness of waterlogged roots. Everything seemed to breathe slowly, in rhythm with the current. Arlo's coat glistened where the mist touched it. His steps made almost no sound. The world felt suspended, as though time had loosened its grip, letting the river carry it away. At a bend, the water slowed, forming a pool wide enough to reflect the sky. Arlo stopped and gazed into it. What he saw was not himself, but the color of age, a faint shimmer of gold and gray, distorted by ripples, surrounded by motion and stillness both. He watched until the reflection vanished. The clouds moved overhead, pale and formless, and with them the light changed. It became softer, colder, a silvery hue that made every stone glisten as though freshly born. Arlo lay down beside the river. He rested his head on the damp earth, eyes half closed. His breath mingled with the faint mist rising from the water. There was a rhythm here that reached beneath thought, the slow, patient heartbeat of the world. It matched his own. He could feel the hum of life through the ground, the movement of roots, the hidden crawl of insects, the distant steps of something crossing far upriver. Every sound was small, but together they made a symphony of quiet, the kind of music that needed no beginning or end. Time passed without measure. The light dimmed, the weather from cloud or the turning of hours, he could not tell. The world was one continuous breath, rising, falling, never breaking. When he rose again, the river had changed color. It was darker now, shadowed by evening, the kind of darkness that came not from the absence of light, but from depth. He followed it onward. The terrain began to shift, from mud to stone, from grass to sand, from silence to the soft murmur of night creatures. Bats flitted through the air like stray pieces of dusk. Somewhere in the distance, a stag moved through shallow water, the splash muffled and slow. The scent of wild mint drifted on the air, sharp and sudden. Arlo paused, inhaled, and for a fleeting instant, the scent unlocked a memory. The hills of his youth, dry and bright beneath summer heat, the sound of bells echoing across them. But the image faded as quickly as it came. Only the river remained, constant and true. He walked until he reached a narrow ford, a place where the current ran shallow and the stones beneath gleamed like dull mirrors. Without hesitation, he stepped into the water. The chill bit deep into his skin. The current pressed against his legs, tugging gently, testing his balance. But he was steady. Each movement was slow, deliberate, a conversation between strength and surrender. Halfway across, he paused. The river hummed around him, its sound filling the air, the sky, even his body. It seemed to whisper not in words but in rhythm, something old and endless. He stood there, surrounded by motion, and closed his eyes. The cold became a part of him, indistinguishable from breath. For a moment, he felt as though he were dissolving, not dying, but merging, fur with water, body with current, heartbeat with flow. Then he stepped forward again. The far bank rose to meet him, slick with moss. He climbed it slowly, each paw finding a sure place. When he reached the top, he shook himself, droplets scattering into the air, catching the dim light like sparks. The world beyond the river felt different. The air was heavier, the silence deeper, as if this side belonged to another realm, one not of travel but of reflection. Arlo stood for a long while, looking back at the water. It moved on, unbothered, carrying away the ripples he had made, as though they had never been. Yet somewhere deep within the current, his passage remained, not as memory, but as rhythm. He turned east again. The land ahead rose gently, covered in low mist and silver grass. A line of dark trees waited in the distance, their shapes soft against the horizon. Night was coming. He walked toward it. Each step was soundless, each breath deep and slow. Behind him, the river slept, but even in sleep, it dreamed of motion. And in its dream, the shadow of a dog moved onward, fading into the quiet distance. The forest began where the mist grew too thick for the open sky to breathe. At first, Arlo did not see the trees, only the suggestion of them, tall, motionless shadows behind the veil of fog. Then, As he walked closer, the outlines sharpened, pillars of bark and moss rising into the pale light, like the ribs of some sleeping world. The air changed. It was cooler here, but denser too, filled with the scent of earth and root, of leaves that had fallen and become part of the ground's slow heartbeat. The sound of the river faded behind him, replaced by another rhythm, the soft sighing of wind caught high among the branches. Arlo paused at the threshold of the forest. He lifted his head, sniffing the air. It smelled old, older than stone, older even than the mountains he had crossed. There was something sacred in its stillness, a silence that was not absence but memory. He stepped forward. The ground gave slightly beneath his weight, covered in layers of leaves that had fallen over countless seasons. Each step released a faint breath of scent, decay and sweetness intertwined. The world underfoot was soft, forgiving, and strangely alive. Light moved differently here. It came filtered through the canopy, broken into shifting fragments, thin, trembling rays that painted his fur with gold and shadow. Dust motes drifted through the beams like slow-falling snow. Arlo moved quietly, his large body gliding with surprising grace. His paws made no sound. The air itself seemed to bend around him. The deeper he went, the darker the forest became, but it was not an unfriendly darkness. It was the kind that held rather than concealed, that gathered rather than threatened. He could hear the faint drip of water somewhere, a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat echoing from the earth's chest. The forest was not empty. It breathed. Every trunk, every fern, every stone seemed to hold the pulse of something that had been waiting. And as he walked, the waiting stirred. He began to sense shapes within the stillness, not movements, not creatures, but impressions, like memories rising to the surface of water. A patch of sunlight on the ground became the warmth of another day long ago. A gust of wind carried the faint scent of wool, of smoke, of summer. He stopped. The memory did not belong to the forest alone. It belonged to him. For the first time since he had begun his journey, Arlo felt the weight of remembering, not through thought, but through the senses, the familiar crunch of dry grass beneath his paws, the taste of dust, the echo of distant bells. He closed his eyes. Behind his lids, the world unfolded, a younger version of itself, bright, dry hills rolling beneath a sun that never seemed to set. There was motion, flocks, movement, the hum of life. And there was himself, young and strong, his coat brighter, his breath faster. The memory did not stay long. It slipped away like light through leaves. When he opened his eyes again, the forest waited, unchanged, unjudging. He moved on. The trees here were massive, their trunks thick with moss, their roots twisted like the limbs of sleeping giants. Between them, the air shimmered faintly, as though light itself remembered too much to remain still. Every so often, he passed a fallen trunk, half sunk into the ground, its bark softened to velvet by time. Mushrooms grew there, pale and luminescent, feeding on what once had been. A bird called somewhere in the canopy, one clear note, then silence. The sound hung in the air, trembling, before fading back into the great stillness. Arlo raised his head toward the canopy. High above, branches intertwined, forming a living cathedral. Shafts of light pierced through in narrow columns, illuminating motes of dust that turned slowly, endlessly, as if caught in some gentle dream. He walked beneath them like a pilgrim. The path was not a path in the human sense. It wound and shifted, formed not by footsteps but by intention, as though the forest itself guided those who entered. And Arlo followed, trusting the quiet pull of the earth beneath his paws. At times, the ground dipped, revealing small hollows filled with water. They mirrored the sky, though no sky could be seen above. Arlo stopped at one and leaned forward, gazing into its surface. The reflection that stared back was blurred, gray fur, weary eyes, breath soft as mist. But behind it, for the briefest moment, another shape flickered, the outline of himself as he once was, younger, brighter, unscarred. He blinked. The vision was gone. Only ripples remained, circling outward. He turned away, but the feeling lingered. The forest did not merely hold memories. It offered them back, reshaped by time. As he moved deeper, the air grew heavier. The scent of pine gave way to that of fern and loam. The wind was gone, Nothing moved but breath. And still, the sense of remembering grew stronger. He began to see traces, faint, half-formed shapes along the ground. The print of a paw, the curve of a bone, a tuft of fur caught on a thorn. Each one shimmered faintly before fading. Not real, yet not illusion. Echoes of what had walked here before. He lowered his head to the ground, breathing them in. They smelled not of death, but of continuation. Arlo walked on. The forest thickened until it seemed endless. Time slowed. Distance ceased to matter. Each step felt the same as the last, yet different. Each one deeper, closer to the center of something he could not name. He came upon a clearing at last. It was small and circular, ringed with tall trees whose trunks leaned inward, as if guarding the silence at its heart. In the center stood a single stone, tall, narrow, weathered smooth. Moss covered its base. Water ran in thin threads down its face. Arlo approached it. The stone radiated cold, not the cold of winter, but of memory preserved. He sniffed it once, then pressed his head gently against its side. The stone was damp and rough beneath his fur. For a moment, he felt nothing. Then, faintly, warmth, as if the stone itself exhaled. Images came, not clear, but soft, like smoke in the dark. A night beneath stars. A fire glowing behind distant walls. A voice calling, not to him, but beyond him. The warmth of another body pressed beside his own. He drew back slowly. The forest was utterly still. Even the air seemed to wait. He circled once around the stone, then lay down beside it. The ground was cool, covered in thick moss that smelled of rain. He closed his eyes. The sound of dripping water returned, slow, even, eternal. Each drop marked not the passing of time, but the presence of it, as if every moment was being remembered, endlessly replayed by the forest's heart. He slept. In his sleep, he dreamed not of what had been, but of what the forest remembered for him. His paws running through grass, the laughter of wind through open fields, the pulse of life, vast and unbroken. When he awoke, the light had changed. It was softer, dimmer, not quite day, not yet night. The forest glowed faintly, as though holding the light within its own skin. Arlo rose slowly. His fur was damp with dew. He looked once more at the stone, at the thin line of water still sliding down its face, and bowed his head. Then he turned away, following the faintest trace of a path that led deeper into shadow. Behind him, the clearing closed. The mist returned, erasing his trail, absorbing the warmth where he had lain. The forest went on breathing, remembering. And within that endless memory, Arlo moved, steady and silent, as if walking through the dream of the world itself. The light came before the dawn. It began not as a color, but as a feeling, a soft, pulsing brightness that rose beneath the skin of the world, slow as breath, vast as silence. It touched the treetops first, turning the dew into trembling fire, then slipped between branches, following the slow rhythm of wind until it reached Arlo's fur. He did not wake suddenly. His body moved before his mind did. A small lift of the head, a shiver through the shoulders, a slow exhale that turned to mist. The forest around him was still, but the stillness had changed. It was no longer the weight of remembering. It was release. He stood and looked toward the east. Between the trees, the fog was thinning, revealing a pale horizon where the forest ended and open ground began. Beyond that, faint and vast, stretched the shape of hills bathed in light. Arlo began to walk. The forest did not resist his leaving. The branches parted softly above him, and the moss under his paws gave way to earth that felt firm, dry, familiar. The farther he went, the more the air changed, warmer, lighter, filled with the scent of grass rather than pine. Soon he reached the edge. The trees ended abruptly, and before him unfolded a meadow that seemed to have no boundary. It spread in all directions, rolling and breathing, its tall grasses shimmering beneath the newborn sun. In the distance, a stream wound like a silver thread through the green. Arlo paused at the threshold. The light touched his fur. It was not the harsh light of noon nor the cold gleam of winter. It was gentle, forgiving, the kind that remembers every shadow yet keeps none. He stepped into it. The grasses swayed around him, brushing against his legs in whispers. Each movement stirred the air with scents of earth and pollen, of wildflowers hidden among the stems. The sky above was enormous, not empty but alive, painted with pale clouds that drifted as if drawn by the same slow breath that moved through the land. Everywhere he looked, life was unfolding in quiet ceremony. A hair moved through the distance, its motion barely more than a thought. A bird traced a low circle over the stream before vanishing into light. The wind carried with it the faint rustle of seeds being scattered, endless beginnings hidden inside endless endings. Arlo moved as though he had always belonged here. The ground rose gently toward a ridge where the meadow met the sky. From there, the world opened wider. Mountains far behind him, their peaks softened by haze. The forest below, a dark sea of green, and before him, a horizon that had no shape, only light. He stopped and stood upon the ridge. For a long time, he did not move. His breath came slow and even. His shadow stretched far across the grass, long and thin, merging with the movement of the land. He closed his eyes. Behind his lids, memory returned, not as images now, but as feeling. The warmth of sun on stone, the scent of smoke rising from a shepherd's fire, the slow heartbeat of the earth beneath his paws. He felt them all at once, interwoven, indistinguishable, the sum of everything he had ever been and everything that had ever been before him. When he opened his eyes again, the world was brighter still. He could see the river winding far below, the forest gleaming where the mist still clung to its roots. He could see the mountains, distant, blue, ancient, and beyond them, the memory of snow. And then, lower, closer, the meadow stretching outward, endless, alive. A soft breeze passed through, lifting his fur. It carried with it faint voices, not spoken words, but the sounds of things that once were: rain on roofs, footsteps on gravel, laughter lost to time. He listened, and the listening was enough. He began to walk again, following the slope downward into the heart of the meadow. The light thickened around him, gold deepening toward white. The air grew warm and full, the way air feels when the day is about to begin. As he walked, the sound of the stream grew clearer, a soft, silver murmur winding through the grass. He reached it and lowered his head to drink. The water was cool, almost sweet. He drank slowly, savoring the taste of something pure, unburdened. When he raised his head, droplets fell from his muzzle like small fragments of sunlight. Across the stream stood a cluster of stones, half buried, smooth from years of wind and rain. Moss grew between them, and tiny flowers had found root in the cracks. The stones looked ancient, but they felt alive, humming faintly, as though keeping time with the pulse of the world. Arlo lay beside them. The ground was soft here, warm beneath the fur. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying scents of earth and sky. He rested his head on his paws and looked out across the meadow. Far above, clouds drifted slow and silent, their shapes changing as if remembering and forgetting at once. The horizon glowed. The day unfolded in stillness. He watched the light move across the land, the slow rotation of shadows, the soft bending of grass, the distant shimmer of the river. Every motion, every sound, was part of something larger, a rhythm older than seasons, older than thought. He did not think of where he had come from or where he would go. The world had no edge now, only continuity. His eyes half closed. The hum of bees in the distance merged with the whisper of grass and the sigh of the breeze. Everything was one sound, steady, circular, eternal. He breathed once, deeply, as if to fill himself with the whole of it, the scent of the meadow, the weight of the earth, the brightness of the air. Then another breath, slower. Then another. The sun climbed. Its light turned golden white, and for a moment the entire meadow shimmered, grass and air and sky merging into one vast, trembling radiance. Arlo's chest rose and fell. A gust of wind passed, gentle as a hand across his fur. It moved through the meadow, rippling outward, bending the grass in waves. The sound it made was soft, like distant water or the sigh of something being set free. The light grew brighter still, not harsh, but absolute. And then it was everywhere, filling the space between breaths, between heartbeats, between what is and what was. In that light, the outline of the old dog softened. The fur became indistinguishable from the grass. The warmth of his body melted into the warmth of the earth. The meadow went on breathing. Above, a bird crossed the sky, a small, dark motion against the gold. Its shadow passed where Arlo had lain, and for a moment, it seemed to bow before continuing on. The wind stilled. The sun lingered, then began its slow descent. Evening came not as darkness, but as calm. The grasses turned silver in the fading light, and the stream reflected the first stars. Somewhere beyond the ridge, night gathered, quiet, full, eternal. And there, in the center of the vast meadow, the earth held its breath and remembered. Not loss, not ending, but the gentle continuation of all things that ever were. The wind moved once more, whispering through the grass, and it sounded, faintly, like the steady tread of paws. Heading home,